Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, June 7th, 2023. You know what that means. If you do, tell me, because I don't. I think it means it's time for another show, and that's all I can think of at the moment. It's a very exciting and interesting day, a very diverse array of interesting stories that could lead us anywhere. We'll see where Greg Dworkin would like to take us. However, in the meantime, we are busy finding our own way. And just by looking at the front page of Daily Kos this morning, and why not try doing that? Why don't you try doing that every day, as a matter of fact? There's no hint. There's 8-10 different things that grab my interest. A great front page, as usual, but today I think even more diverse a collection of stories than usual. Of course, there's, again, the looming possibility of federal indictment for the former guy. That's fantastic. It's always good to have that on in the news. But then again, it's always in the news, and then, you know, the day ends and he hasn't been indicted, and it's hard to get too excited about having those indictments come down. And then, of course, once they do come down, no one should expect that they're going to come and arrest the guy and keep him in jail for any length of time. Certainly not pre-trial, as might happen to other people. But that's just sort of the reality of arresting former presidents who have Secret Service details. And we're not really ready to do that yet. I don't know why, but that just seems to be the case. In the meantime, let's see. The war continues in Ukraine. There's something we would ordinarily pay almost no attention to in the world of golf, which is happening. Although, when Trump was in office, we probably mentioned golf more frequently than during any other period during which the show's been on the air. And it was important too. And now this story once again has golf stories rising to prominence. I don't know exactly. I don't know. I don't have any feelings about it from a golf perspective, but, from a, let's say human rights perspective, it becomes a story. The PGA is, I guess, announcing a merger with the breakaway, I don't know what they call it, LIV or LIV golf, the alternative tour of sorts, started by a couple of people who have always really had some issues one way or the other with the PGA. They may even have some points, for all I know, in terms of their grievances with the PGA. But in looking for ways to finance their grievances with the PGA and put some financial pressure on them and organize a tour of their own, and I mean, I guess everybody has the right to try to do that, they cast about looking for money, which is amazing because they are pro-golfers and extraordinarily rich, but they're not rich enough to come up with the money that it would take to lure other already rich professional golfers away from the tour that pays them and makes them rich, and lure them to a different tour. If you have, if you're talking to a collection of multimillionaires, and you want to motivate them to join your competitive league, you're going to need an awful lot of money, not only to put on the events, but to lure them away with prize money. And I guess they figured the readiest source of money that didn't care about where it was coming from or where it was going, particularly, it ended up being Saudi Arabia. So the Saudi-backed LIV Golf Tour idea, which Trump helped get off the ground in a way I guess he really didn't, did he? I mean, he hosted several of their tournaments, but that's like saying, would you like to have a bunch of money? Yes, sure. Thanks for helping us get off the ground. Helping them get off the ground would be contributing money to but anyway, the point is he's somehow tied to all this. So are the Sauds and their compound that they call a country, Saudi Arabia. And now they're merging the two of them. I guess the LIV Golf Tour put enough pressure on them and lured enough people over in that direction. And I guess the test was, Will golfers care whether their prize money comes from Saudi Arabia, Mr. Bonesaw, etc., or will they not care? And the answer is they will not care. And then the PGA figure, well, then we don't care either. We want to be the one and only golf tour there is that matters for much. So the only way to do that is to either buy them out, which we can't do because they're backed by unlimited pools of petrodollars, or two, merge with them and offer them our prestige. And so I guess they have chosen to go that route, which is kind of weird and interesting and I guess unexpected. And I guess as a marker of how weird and unexpected the story is, Hunter is the one chosen to cover this over at Daily Kos. That actually means something. I mean, I don't know if he knows this. I think so. But when they're kind of like, there's a weird and wacky story that might not be connected to anything, but it's just strange and out of the blue, and we need somebody to make this interesting to the rest of the world because there is something going on here. They frequently turn to Hunter, as they have done here. PGA says screw human rights, merges with Saudi golf group. It's not an overly long story, I don't think, but perhaps we'll just start the day with it because I don't know. It's a pleasant thing to start with, golf, right? Even if there is an underlying unpleasantry to the story. If you're out playing golf this morning, well, then you're not hearing us now. But if you're planning on going later and you're along the East Coast somewhere, you might want to reconsider because it is apparently an air hazard, poor air quality hazard day, which usually comes when we're talking about 100-degree plus days. But it's an otherwise pleasant or I guess a forecast of an otherwise pleasant 80 or so degrees in our area, which is remarkable for June because we usually just plow straight into summer and start having 90-plus degree days, and, we'll have them soon enough. But it's a very pleasant day, but the Canadian wildfire smoke apparently has, it's been affecting areas for a long time. Not the Western Canadian wildfires, the Eastern Canadian wildfires. I don't know what's happening in Canada, but, well, it's on fire, but I don't know why, but, surely someone can explain to me climate change, et cetera, and I would believe that. Anyway, it's affecting things here, not only in upper atmosphere. I watched the Weather Channel video on this, so I'm an expert now. Not only is the smoke in the upper atmosphere affecting the colors of the sunrise and sunset, which is very beautiful, even if not very particularly good for air quality, but now down in the lower atmosphere to the point where it's hazy at ground level, and allegedly smells of smoke in some places. I haven't been able to detect that, but you might want to change your schedule if you're going to be planning on spending 4+ hours outside today. Anyway, as Hunter notes, in what can only be described as a huge win for the Saudi Arabian monarchy, that's the Saud monarchy, really, that has so desperately tried to paper over human rights abuses, including the assassination of critics, the PGA Tour, the European DP World Tour, and Saudi-owned LIV Golf, have announced that they will be merging into a single golf entity. In the short term, that means the flurry of lawsuits between the PGA and LIV Golf are now moot, but that's nothing compared to the long-term results. The merger of the three golfing leagues into a single entity with a name yet to be determined, I think KITM Golf would be a great one, will include rolling up Saudi-owned LIV Golf into a minority ownership of the new golf league, giving the Saudi monarchy what it wanted all along, partial ownership of the PGA Tour. The Saudi investment fund will retain exclusive rights to make further investments, reports CBS News, and the fund's governor, Yasir Al-Rumayyan, will join the PGA Tour's policy board. Oh boy. Other winners include professional golfers who defected from the PGA Tour to LIV Golf in exchange for significant cash bonuses from LIV, which led sometimes to frosty crowd receptions when returning to PGA events. And seditionist Donald Trump, who is already celebrating the merger. He's one of the winners, too. The deal likely means the newly merged company will host events at Trump's own resorts, a significant boost from the post-coup period in which the Saudi monarchy's LIV Golf was Trump's most significant league partner. The PGA stopped doing events at his properties for a long time, well, a couple of years, and I guess this will bring them back. Elsewhere, The seemingly inexplicable merger is being ripped and condemned. Golf Week columnist Dan Wolkin ripped PGA heads as frauds, saying a year ago, PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan stood up in front of the world and argued that the way Saudi Arabia treats women, gay people, and journalists should matter in a player's decision whether to jump at the guaranteed payday that came with an LIV invitation. The columnist also noted that while the PGA Tour is claiming this to be a merger, on paper it looks more like a hostile takeover. That's probably the more correct assessment. After the Saudi monarchy sanctioned murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018, the monarchy's investment fund has been making aggressive purchases that regime critics have called sports washing. It's a new term for me, but it's been bandied about a bit in the last couple of days. An effort to paper over the regime's brutality by ingratiating itself to sports fans who may not necessarily be aware of the kingdom's often astonishing brutality. The attempts were met with revulsion in the professional golf world, or they were. Senator Chris Murphy was among those to immediately express skepticism of the PGA Tour's prior supposed commitments to human rights. So weird. PGA officials were just in my office just months ago, talking about how the Saudis' human rights record should disqualify them from having a stake in a major American sport, Murphy tweeted in response to the news. He should be tooting, not tweeting. Anyway, I guess maybe their concerns weren't really about human rights. Indeed, it now looks like PGA officials were more concerned with business competition than with tying themselves to an authoritarian regime that kills dissidents and treats its nation's women as barely more than property. Once the PGA found a way to evade the monetary costs of the former tour officials simultaneously, Once the PGA found a way to evade the monetary costs of the former, that is to say, the terrible human rights record, tour officials simultaneously dropped their criticism of the latter. Now we got it. Well, nobody can really claim to be surprised by this. Nobody's terribly stunned that the officers of a professional sports league would swallow whatever human rights abuses needed to be swallowed in exchange for money. At best, sports columnists and everyone else are shocked by just how brazen the PGA switcheroo was, with human rights being waved as the tour's flag right up until the moment the ink began to dry in the new partnership. Now that's quite the heel turn, as Greg would no doubt put it. And that's it. We've got it. We've made it all the way through. I don't know whether Greg was listening to the story or whether there's an issue with his Skype. Although I don't see the Raft O Stories available this morning. So something must be going on at the Dworkin campus this morning. And if there are any updates, we'll bring them to you. Okay. Maybe I can check my Twitter and Mastodon feeds to see whether there's any new information about this. But, okay. At any rate, I see nothing. So, well, hope all is well, and that we'll get a check-in at some point soon. Like I said, plenty of stories to go with, and I'm sure there will be. Well, let's see. We can borrow a few more. Why not? This one I thought was interesting as well, and sets the stage. Oh, let me save this one for a little bit later, and we'll talk a little bit more about the debt ceiling deal. What's shaking out of it, and something that I was pretty sure Greg was going to ask me about today, but maybe he's gone to the library to do research for himself. I don't know. A weird development that on the House floor with rules for something completely unrelated, legislatively speaking, to the debt ceiling bill, but clearly motivating the Freedom Caucus, the so-called Freedom Caucus, to rebel against leadership now. And there's a note from Greg. Everything's fine, just a late start today. Perfectly fine. Starting to make me worried. But we're good. Take your time. Post the Raft those stories. All right. Well, don't take your time. Just jump right in, and we'll do it that way. Okay. Hey, good morning, Greg. Everything's all right. That's good news.
Everything is cool.
Okay. That's fine. Sleep
Had a little chasing Abby to get rid of right before the show, but
okay.
We're all good now.
All right. Well, all right. No problem at all. I was just going to launch into the procedural story of the day, but I have a feeling that you wanted to do that. So,
that's okay.
I waited for you.
I love procedural stories that are set up by procedural stories.
Okay. Well, that's okay.
So if you're talking about the fact that the House GOP tried to tank their own party.
I was not yet getting to that. First, I was talking about golf, which is about tanking a different thing. But
yes.
yeah, then I got to this story. I said, well, all right, I know this is going to be on top of the agenda. So let's open it up.
Well, the Pundit
for
Roundup says far-right House members tank a GOP bill in an act of pique.
Yes.
So as we are now expert in, all of us, not just David, when you want to pass a bill in the House, you go to Rules Committee and you vote on a rule, and then you send it to the House floor, and they vote on the rule. And the rule says things like how long you can debate and whether or not you can have amendments. Mm-hmm. And once the rule is passed, then you get the vote on the actual bill.
Yes. And the rule tells you how.
So we've seen arguments in the Rule Committee. They're usually not dramatic because the Speaker's Committee, the Rules Committee, is set up so that if the Speaker wants a rule passed, then the rule passes. It's usually done by majority vote, and generally the in-party completely agrees and the out-party completely disagrees, but because it's a 9-4 committee, the Speaker has pretty much control over what gets to the floor. We've seen a little drama. That happened when Chip Roy and a couple of the other extremists decided that they didn't like the agreement on the debt ceiling.
Yes.
And when they were outvoted and the rule was passed by the Rules Committee and then sent to the floor, they complained. And they said, you're breaking some unwritten agreements. I won't call them unspoken because Chip Roy says they were spoken.
Well, he speaks about them.
He says that Kevin McCarthy promised him that nothing would get out of Rules Committee without unanimous consent from the Republicans. And that's not what happened here.
Weird.
Right?
Yeah.
It was a 7-2 vote from the 9 Republicans. It wasn't unanimous, and it got out of committee anyway. And so Chip Roy was really ticked off, and he said there's going to be hell to pay for this, if not now, then later. Well, are you going to vacate the motion to vacate the chair? Are you going to get rid of the Speaker? No, because we don't really have anybody else to replace him, but we'll think of something else. So that something else finally came up.
Finally,
and again, remember the process. Rules Committee, then vote on the rule, then vote on the bill.
Right.
So here's how the Washington Post has it. Hard right Republicans still angry over debt ceiling foil McCarthy on vote. They sunk a GOP procedural vote Tuesday in a show of strength in a razor-thin majority. Or, as Punchbowl puts it, for the first time in more than 20 years, a rebellion within the House majority brought down a rule temporarily stripping Republican leadership of its control of the floor. The rule, and the bills whose debate it controlled, were standard Republican talking points, a proposal to block any attempt by the Biden administration to phase out the use of gas stoves.
Which, of course, wasn't happening, but okay. Yeah.
But it was a stupid bill. It didn't matter. And the radicals in the Republican Party, some of the House Freedom Caucus said, you know what? We're going to get 10 votes or so. We're going to vote against the rule. Yeah, get out of committee. But once it gets to the floor and we get to vote on the rule before we get to vote on the bill, we're going to vote against it and bring this thing down. That never happens. But we're telling McCarthy, remember, if 5 of us defect, you lose, and 10 of us are going to defect, maybe 11. And if that happens, you are beholden to us. And some of the GOP lawmakers who voted to bring down the rule even had amendment votes scheduled, like Lauren Boebert, Bob Good, Chip Roy, Andy Biggs, Ralph Norman.
Yeah.
Okay. And Norman and Roy are on Rules Committee. Norman voted for the rule before voting against it on the floor. I mean, there's just some weird stuff going on here.
Sure.
And the nearly dozen conservative lawmakers who took down the rule said they were aggrieved by how GOP leadership had treated Andrew Clyde from Georgia over a measure he wanted to vote on, a bill to limit the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms ability, ATF, to clamp down on pistol braces.
Okay.
But that's not really what this is.
Not a brace of pistols.
Over the debt limit bill that McCarthy muscled through last week over their protests. And then today, Punchbowl says The realities of the current House Republican Conference and the knotty institutional issues facing the GOP leadership are screaming back into full view this week, providing a neat encapsulation of what Speaker Kevin McCarthy's team will need to contend with for the rest of the 118th Congress, which happens to be this one.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, it just so happens it's this one, yes.
So you'll recall last week or last month or last year or whenever it was, when the debt committee thing passed, Kevin McCarthy and his office, who were the source of much of the Gossip Sheet's news, were telling the Gossip Sheet that Kevin McCarthy won.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And we said, what do you mean? It shows he's weak. No. It shows how strong I am because I got this thing through when everybody said we couldn't. Yeah, what price? And now we're seeing the price. He's a really weak speaker. Stuff like this is happening to him. It's going to happen from now on. There was an article even in the New York Times the other day about McCarthy claims he won the battle, but Biden won the fine print. And when you look at the law that actually passed, very little got done that Republicans wanted, and Biden got a whole lot out of it, including, of course, not tanking the world economy, which would have been bad for his campaign. So point being that McCarthy lost a lot and in many ways has neutered the Republican conference, the caucus, for the whole rest of the 118th Congress. And that's why the radicals are pissed off. They're right to be pissed off in the sense that they know that their power has been neutered, not with the Republicans. They can still give McCarthy hell, but with the country as a whole. And they're not happy about it. And that's what happened. And it's, interesting.
Yeah, well, they're learning the very difficult lesson of if you don't have a majority of the body with you, you will not win your votes. But, that was in I'm Just a Bill, and they should have learned it when they were kids.
Well, it's not just that. It's true that you need the most votes compared to the people on the other side voting against you in order to get something done. It's that they seem to be finally pivoting to, you know what, now that we're the majority, let's try to pass bills we like. And it turns out you can't do that unless you go back to that just a bill thing. In other words, governance is a lot more difficult than calling press conferences and missing votes because you're running up the stairs and got there late, like Boebert.
Right, yeah, that was some story. Joan told us that one yesterday, that so she missed the vote and then turned it into a protest, saying, I skipped the vote intentionally, even though somebody had video of her trying desperately to make the vote. But, yeah, the other lesson they're learning, and one that really wasn't presented in I'm Just a Bill, but is quickly becomes apparent to anyone who actually serves, and I mean by actually serving in the House of Representatives or nearby works as staff, that means showing up for work and trying to do things as opposed to just having press conferences all the time, is, although there's lots of nuance and plenty of different reasons to be for or against a bill or a rule or anything in between, there are in the end really only two things you can do about it: vote for it or vote against it, or abstain or miss the vote.
Or run up the steps and miss the vote.
Right, that's a new one. I had never run into that one before. But while there are many reasons to support or oppose something, those are the only two choices. And if you are going to cast a protest vote opposing a rule to strike out at leadership because rules are leadership measures, then, well, one of the things that happens is you can't bring bills to the floor. And, okay, I mean, as protests by Republicans go, not allowing Republicans to bring Republican bills to the floor is one of my favorites.
Yeah. Now, appropriations bills are supposed to pass.
Yes.
But unlike the debt ceiling cliff, if they don't pass, there's sort of a mechanism to deal with it.
Yes.
So, in other words, if nothing else passes this entire 118th Congress that Republicans propose, that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and it's okay with them, too, which is a weird thing. This might end up being the secret win of the Freedom Caucus, is that somehow the deal apparently commits the House to passing all 12 of its appropriations bills, although it doesn't say, I don't think, anywhere that they all have to be passed separately. But that is, they all have to be passed. They can't simply be kicked forward with a continuing resolution. That hasn't happened in a long, long time. So chances are they won't make it to the end and get that done. And if that doesn't happen,
they do, they'll do it with Democratic votes, which is itself bizarre.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
I mean, that never happens except for like this is happening.
Yeah, I guess that's right. That's the flip side of it. Is there's two ways of looking at this, the way this sets up. One is that the Freedom Caucus people who are insistent on more spending cuts and feel like the debt ceiling deal allowed, I don't know, anybody, Republicans, Democrats, Biden, everybody, to wriggle out from under their insistence that there be massive across-the-board spending cuts, except for the little things that they like. And now, if the 12 appropriations bills aren't passed on time, there's an automatic across-the-board cut that's triggered. So now they could defeat the rule, or attempt to join in defeating the rule for even just one appropriations bill, and thereby get these automatic triggers flipped and cut the spending. But by the same token, they also may find that Republican leadership decides that they need Democratic support to pass these things, and Democrats say, yeah, well, you're not going to have us passing the rule unless it's a really favorable bill or a rule.
Or you promise us something else.
Yeah, and I guess we'll have to wait and see whether that comes together. But so far the idea of saying that I have secret agreements with the leadership that I'm going to bring the government down over unless they're honored doesn't seem like a particularly good tactic. Maybe get something in writing.
And as far as analysis go, I won seems a little simplistic.
To say the least. Okay, we'll say the most after our first break.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. There's still more to talk about. It's too unclear at this point, too hazy. Reply hazy. Ask again. The air's hazy. The reply's hazy. We don't know how the debt ceiling deal will eventually shake out, but it was exciting to watch Republicans defeat a rule, especially a rule the rule, it wasn't particularly dumb, but the underlying bill was dumb, but they wanted to make it look like they were preventing the evil communist Joe Biden from banning gas stoves, which he wasn't doing.
Well, to be fair, they never call him a communist. They always call him a socialist.
I see. All right. I got confused. It was communist was what they were calling people in the school boards when I was reading yesterday's article.
Yes, that's what Marjorie Traitor Greene says.
Okay. So at any rate, this socialist, not quite communist, was going to ban gas stoves, but he really wasn't, but they were going to have a bill about it anyway, just in case, except now they're not going to have a bill about it because they're mad about something that has to do with the debt ceiling deal that didn't actually change the debt ceiling, and also there were secret promises that nobody is willing to acknowledge, and it's starting to look like maybe those secret promises weren't real. So, okay.
Well, I would put it this way. Kevin McCarthy is so weak he can't even pass a messaging bill.
Yeah. basically it. This is something all the Republicans supported this bill. They all did.
Right.
They all wanted to run on it, but now they won't.
So let's look at Punch Bowl and what they have to say.
All right.
They say the GOP conference is once again devolved into nasty internecine conflict between hardline conservatives and everyone else. This took, a week and a half after Kevin's big win? This split calls into question how Republicans can ever coalesce around their agenda, or even whether they can govern at all over the coming 6 months. Remember, all of this stuff was supposed to have been resolved by the fact that Kevin McCarthy got this, I promise you everything to get the speaker vote, followed by I promise you everything to get my debt limit thing done, and it backfired. It didn't work. Everybody who was super hardline on the GOP side said, wait a minute, you just gave away the store. You released a hostage. Whatever else you say, you released a hostage. Now we're powerless. We hate you for that. That's what happened. And so, there's my abbreviated pundit analysis of the whole debt thing. So you can say up and down how McCarthy won because his office tells you. And you could say he had a really weak hand and he played it the best possible way. Maybe so. But he still got taken through the cleaners, and now his hardliners are really pissed off about it. And as Punch Bowl says, this is all fallout from the end game for the Fiscal Responsibility Act and comes despite pleas from McCarthy to focus on the next play now that the debt limit crisis has ended. So he went and pleaded with his caucus, and they said, right, tell me that means this. Put Nancy Pelosi in that position and tell me this is what would go down.
No, she won't let you put her in that position. She quit that position.
No, exactly. There's a whole bunch of stuff that would happen that would make it that she would never be in that position.
Yeah, well, starting with never promising anybody anything crazy. Although increasingly it looks like the things claimed by Chip Roy are impossible. But
right. Well, again, it's
maybe
not
he was
that Nancy Pelosi
because
does
they are
everything right and she's a paragon and she's wonderful. But I think she's a reasonable, recent example of an excellent speaker who does their job.
Sure.
Just as comparison.
Yeah, and maybe McCarthy, that no one could deal with crazies as nutty as the Freedom Caucus, but, that's their problem, literally, and not ours.
Well, we don't
have
that as Kucinich to deal with. But hardliners are upset that McCarthy cut a debt limit deal with President Joe Biden that Democrats supported. See, the fact that Democrats supported it automatically means it was terrible for them.
That's so amazing, too. And we still run around, and Punch Bowl will still tell us that, a bipartisan thing equals a good thing, no matter how dumb the bipartisanship was. And there's a whole section of the Republican Party saying the reason we hate it is that other people were in agreement with it.
Yeah. The bipartisan package, they write, did not include a host of Republican priorities, mostly because Biden and Democratic leaders would never accept those proposals, which we said at the outset. You don't need the 14th Amendment. You don't need to invoke it anyway in order to say, I'm never going to accept those proposals. He just came out and said, I will never accept those proposals. And then whispered, if I have to use the 14th Amendment to prove it, I will. But that's not the point. The point is I will never accept those proposals.
Yeah, all right. So that worked.
Yeah, so for those of you who are complaining about messaging, that's it. And by doing it that way, Biden got to negotiate and got what he needed. So on Tuesday, conservatives took out their anger on the House floor, sinking a rule on some red meat Republican messaging bills and briefly stripping control of the chamber from the leadership's hands.
Womp womp.
The right is also peeved at leadership, namely Steve Scalise, over the schedule for taking up a resolution by Representative Andrew Clyde that would prevent the Biden administration from regulating pistol braces. Scalise had suggested that the House may have to wait for the Senate to act first, and moderate Republicans were upset with Clyde over his vote against the rule on the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and there was concern they could oppose his pistol brace bill. Conservatives, however, and this is the gossip that sometimes is interesting to hear because, it, but sometimes you don't see it written down.
Okay.
And this was not in I'm Just a Bill. Conservatives suggested Clyde had been threatened by the leadership for his previous rule vote. Imagine that.
Yes. They're astonished that this sort of thing happens, although it's the entire premise of
it's
the Trump administration.
Speakers work.
It is, and it always has been. And they're huge fans of having Donald Trump do it to people.
Right. That's not the only example of backlash against hardliners. In a closed House Republican conference meeting Tuesday morning, so sometimes they call themselves the conference and sometimes they call themselves a caucus.
Oh, I see what's happening.
Representative
Freedom Caucus.
Sometimes. Democrats have a conference. Republicans have a mess.
Democrats have a caucus. Republicans, the whole bunch of them is the conference, but the Freedom Group is a caucus. So
yeah.
That's the problem.
And it's a mess. All right. Democrats definitely have a caucus. Representatives, It's old style politics. Representatives Tom Cole, the chair of the Rules Committee, and Tim Walberg made comments about how procedural votes should be carried by the majority party. This was a not-so-tacit criticism of the group of a few dozen conservatives that attempted to thwart the party's agenda on the debt limit vote. And the anger was far more poignant last week on the House floor. Mm-hmm. Leadership-aligned lawmakers asked floor staff for paper printouts of the rule vote on the Fiscal Responsibility Act so they could identify the 29 Republicans who abandoned the party on the procedural motion.
Yes.
Think of the lofty goals this majority has. They want to pass all 12 spending bills. They need to renew the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. They have a 5-year farm bill. They have to reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration. And all these efforts will take compromise from Republicans and Democrats. And compromise on the debt limit is exactly what caused all of this.
Uh-oh.
So they've got a problem. Yeah. Because in order to get what they need, they will have to compromise. But that is anathema and makes them apostates. And so, how do you resolve this? You can't. How do you reconcile this? You can't. And so, again, let's get back to what I was saying before. Kevin won. That was their message. Mm-hmm. And we looked at it at the time and said, how did he win? Why are they writing that? And our speculation was, well, the only reason they're writing that is, A, they don't really understand what's going on here, and 2, Kevin told them that because that's where they get most of their news sources from.
Yeah.
Because it's the only thing that would make any sense. He didn't win.
No. And I guess the background of it is, this is the way they're trained. Did the bill pass? It did pass. That's a win for somebody. Who's the head of the House? That guy. All right. I guess he won.
So no sense of the big picture, which is odd because these are the experts here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no.
Yeah, exactly.
Turns out that they're not. This is very interesting, and it does have a lot of interesting ramifications. I'm surprised. Well, who knows? I'm surprised that they're surprised that this is how, power is exercised in a leadership role where you're herding 435, or at least half of the 435 cats. And by the way, several of your cats have rabies, and it's very difficult to herd them. And, in a related story that I don't think I don't have to turn to it now. I can handle it in the second half, but I noticed that on the front page over at Daily Kos, Kos himself writing the story entitled "MAGA World Comes for Marjorie Traitor Greene." This is kind of the story of what always happens in Washington is you come in as maverick, crazy outsider who doesn't listen to anybody, and then you're offered a deal, kind of like the PGA Golf Tour was or offered a big deal, and you sell out and you join the McCarthy forces in exchange for being elevated in importance in Washington so you can kick ass and do more mavericky things, and then the other mavericks say, hey, this didn't happen for me. I didn't get the piece of this deal, and now the things I want aren't happening, and leadership is responsible, and you switch sides. You're a sellout, man. And this is exactly what's happening, in the microcosm of the MAGA world. Marjorie Traitor Greene, who was riding high originally, is now under attack as no longer pure enough to be a member of the Freedom Caucus and the MAGA caucus, and she's sold out to the leadership in order to get some of these stupid bills to the floor and actually pass these dumb bans on things that aren't happening. The pistol brace one may end up being just like the gas stove one. Those rules might not ever come to fruition, but they're damn sure going to pass a bill that says if they do, we're going to be angry about it. And they can't even pass that.
Also, are interested to see what happens to Stefanik about it.
Oh, yes, okay.
She's sort of in the same position.
Her in a long time.
Right? I'm a normie. These people are in charge. I better become a firebrand. but I'm on leadership. So I'm a firebrand that supports McCarthy. Oh, they're mad at McCarthy? Where does that leave me?
Yeah.
I'll figure it out. But in the meantime, Marjorie Traitor Greene, yell at her.
Yes. Right. Sure. And you better yell at her because, a quick reminder, Stefanik had a contested race for the leadership position she now occupies. And does anybody remember? I was reminded the other day, just reading a story. Does anybody remember who she ran against? Who was her opponent in that race? And the answer
Cheney, right?
is she was replacing Cheney, but Cheney eventually, once she was out of it, the question was, which firebrand idiot are we going to put in there? And originally her chief rival for the slot, I guess sort of the primary in order to take on Cheney and knock her out, was Chip Roy. So Chip Roy sees,
which gives you an idea of his strength in the Congress.
Yes, but now he finds a way to worm his way back into, a leadership of the opposition of the leadership.
Relevance.
Yeah, and Stefanik has been pretty quiet.
Yes.
As of late, and because she doesn't really know which way to go here, and I guess she's also seeing if they'll
exactly
ostracize
right. She's a finger to the wind politician,
Greene,
and she literally doesn't know which way to go. Therefore, she doesn't say anything.
So it's really kind of interesting.
Which is not always bad politics, but gives you an idea of her lack of leadership.
Yes.
So just as a aside, parenthetical aside.
Okay.
The dam breaking in Ukraine is important. The air quality is important. There's a bunch of other important stories we won't get to today.
Yeah,
maybe tomorrow.
Okay.
But it's not like they don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think this is key to what happens next, and that's why I think it's so important to spend time on it. I thought spending a little time understanding rules is important because look how important it turns out to be later. I mean, this stuff keeps coming up. Who ever heard of the Rules Committee before? Well, now you're an expert.
Yep. It's the way things go.
Yeah.
Become an
Punchbowl again. Conservatives complain they got rolled on the debt limit compromise. Wait a minute. Punchbowl was telling us last week Kevin won, despite the fact that 2/3 of House Republicans voted for it. The REINS Act, legislation Republicans have recycled since 2011 that's designed to loosen federal regulations, wasn't included in the compromise. And conservatives griped about what they considered to be $4 trillion in new spending in the bill because that was in the fine print that they didn't read, a reference to the price of hiking the debt limit until 2025.
Except, P.S., they didn't hike the debt limit.
Right.
They just
Kevin said to the press, they asked him, what do you think about this motion to vacate? And he said, bring it, said Ken Buck. How do you govern if you can't pass a rule?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. How do you?
You don't. I mean, unless you get rid of special rules, but that would be really difficult.
Right.
You'd have to have a majority.
I could just, 2 months ago, not that long ago, I would have read this paragraph and said, David.
What?
How do you govern if you can't pass a rule? What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, now you know. Yeah. You don't, the stuff that gets glossed over. This definitely wasn't in, the Schoolhouse Rock version dealing with special rules. But, things don't come up for a vote just because you feel like it. You have to vote on what you're going to vote on. And they voted, no, we're not going to vote on this thing. And it's amazing, given that this bill that they're fighting over, that they fought over yesterday, plus the bill that they're fighting over on the side that apparently convinced a lot of Freedom Caucus people to vote no on the rule yesterday. I mean, both would ordinarily be enormously popular among Republicans. These are things they definitely want, and they've killed both of them.
Right. They've killed their ability to do anything. So, awesome. Punchbowl again. Kevin said to the press, they asked him, what do you think about this motion to vacate? And how do you govern if you can't pass a rule? McCarthy met with some of the conservatives, including caucus chair Scott Perry, Texas GOP Representative Chip Roy, and Representative Byron Donalds. Tuesday evening, conservatives said the conversations were continuing, but it's unclear what happened. And then Punchbowl goes on to editorialize, and I quote, the facts don't matter here. Whatever the right is peeved about now doesn't make much difference. Conservatives have shown here they can screw up the leadership without trying to boot McCarthy out. Politically, the majority of the majority is not enough. Whatever you think of McCarthy's debt limit deal last week, getting 2/3 of the House was a big feat. You're still not going to back off on that. And it easily clears the conservative standard that the majority should be necessary to bring bills to the floor. But McCarthy's slim 5-seat majority gives conservatives plenty of opportunities to make McCarthy, Scalise, and Tom Emmer's lives miserable. That's the majority whip. The right has effective veto power over McCarthy's ability to bring anything to the floor, and they show they're unafraid to use it, even if they agree with the legislation. Also, secret deals are no good. Conservatives keep screaming that McCarthy's violated several terms of the agreement he made when he became Speaker. McCarthy and his allies say it's not true. It'd be great to know which side is not being truthful, but we'll never know because the deal was never committed to paper.
Yeah.
We said at the time, Chip Roy, next time get it written down.
Yeah.
This was a strategic error by both sides, and it'll continue to be problematic.
Both sides. Again, I'll disagree with the
both sides of the
experts.
Republicans. Not both sides
no, but even so, I will disagree with that as well. There's a legalistic answer to this. If your agreement is secret, you haven't got an agreement. That's what Judge Judy would tell you. She'd throw you out of court in 2 seconds flat. And the fault lies with the people who thought they had something in hand and didn't actually get anything. And they were outsmarted by Kevin McCarthy, which is just outrageous to have that happen.
Well, it gives you an idea of where we're at here.
Yeah. So, right. Yeah. Well, I had a secret agreement. No, secret agreements aren't agreements. No, but he told me, well, this is court.
I'm reminded of Nancy Mace. How can we be outsmarted by a guy who can't put his pants on?
Right.
And she was talking about Joe Biden. I'm thinking you were talking about Kevin McCarthy.
That's probably
He's running rings around you guys.
Yeah.
And what does that say about you?
I don't know. I mean, I do know. It says they're dumb. So, yeah, they really did screw this up enormously. And, here we are sitting here saying, I guess I find myself in agreement after all. Now, here's another ironically, this is another place where they're going to get majority Democratic support for the idea that Republicans should never bring any bills to the floor.
Yes.
We agree. But we are going to prevent Republicans, our own party, from bringing our agenda to the floor because we're angry about having allied with Democrats. And guess who your biggest allies in preventing anything from coming to the floor is going to be? Democrats.
Yeah, we're with you, Democrats said from the wings as they push the Republicans on stage.
It's pretty good. Nobody's pure enough to be in the Freedom Caucus. Let's all kill ourselves. Jeez. Right. Holy mackerel. All right. I mean,
so,
go ahead.
I think it's important. I think that it really gives you an idea of what's going on. It's hard to fear these clowns. Yes, they can do a tremendous amount of damage, but look who they are and look what they're doing.
Yeah. And whenever it comes to, there's nothing better for the other side, the opposition, in any situation than one side killing itself in purity wars. That's going to be awesome.
Now, a congressional reporter for AP, Farnoosh Amiri, last night said, here's an update. There's a group of 10 GOP lawmakers. Remember, you can only lose 5 or 4.
Yeah, you're only a lawmaker if you make laws. Let me also point that out.
Yeah, a group of 10 GOP lawmakers are now saying they will oppose all legislation that comes to the House unless they get an agreement in writing from Speaker Kevin McCarthy to go back to the January agreement. Remember, it only takes 5 no votes to block any bill.
I'm out of breath.
Now explain how that works.
Yeah, I don't know. 1, they're not lawmakers. 2, they don't have secret agreements. We have a secret agreement. To prove it, I want you to write that agreement down that we had that you said you wouldn't write down. No. And
reminds me of the old Monty Python sketch. Oh, you want to join the Secret Service? Why do you want to join the Secret Service? Well, okay, fine. Can you keep a secret? Okay, you're in then.
I guess that's all there is to it.
Well, what if you can't keep a secret?
This is
what
amazing.
What if our secret agreement is written down and posted?
Yeah. And so they're very upset that they want to go back to the secret agreement that didn't exist, but they want him to write it down. But he didn't write it down the first time, but they said okay, which, by the way, is a terrific analog to something that they just complained about 2 seconds ago, letting the hostage go, right? They had leverage over McCarthy for a moment while he was not yet confirmed to be Speaker. They were willing to go through with the farce of having multiple ballots fail. And then they gave it all up for secret unwritten agreements. And then, surprise, nobody honored the secret unwritten agreements. They may never have existed in the first place. And now they want to have the hostage back. And why do they want this? Because that guy is an idiot. He lets hostages go. Well, let hostages go. Well, yeah, but we're sorry we did.
I'm just surprised Punchbowl didn't lead with, this is all good for John McCain.
This is a perfect opportunity to do so. And it is good for John McCain. People will say, I wish we had John McCain back.
Yeah.
Because they at least did things. I mean, no, but...
No, but exactly. Again, it's making Mitt Romney look good.
By the way, all those Freedom Caucus Republicans probably hate John McCain, and he's reviled by MAGA types. But what was it that he did that made them so angry?
Insist on regular order.
Not only that, but when push came to shove and a Republican priority was on the floor and everything was riding on it, he came and said, oh yeah? Well, screw you, no, and killed it, which is exactly what they're doing now. But it's awesome and freedomy when they do it and jerky and socialist when he does.
Yeah. So, Chip Roy, arguably, is what you might call a principled crazy wingnut. Which is to say, he's got crazy wingnut stuff, but unlike Marjorie Traitor Greene, he'll stick to his guns. He will vote yes or no based on what he really, really thinks, as opposed to what's good for him.
Well, but Marjorie Traitor Greene won't do that anymore.
No, because she's a traitor.
Yeah, she's a traitor to the traitors, even. That's all right. Well, stick with Chips Roy.
Yeah. So, in the next few minutes, I think we should focus sort of more broadly without getting specific, although there's plenty of specifics. Broadly. But you don't really need to point to anything. I'll just give you Marcy Wheeler.
Oh, okay.
Empty Wheel on Twitter. You would do well to shift your media diet this week from those who can tell you what Jack Smith was investigating 3 months ago. And you get plenty of TikToks about that. He interviewed this person. He got Mark Meadows. He's down in Florida doing this. He's in Washington doing that. Shift from that to those who can tell you how espionage cases go down in court.
Oh. Hey, espionage.
Secrets and Laws and B. Van Grack both know how this works on the inside. I'm happy to tell you I follow them both, so I felt good. Charlie Savage and Josh Gerstein are two of the few journalists with really extensive experience covering the Espionage Act. Joyce White Vance, Barb McQuaid, Terry Canfield are really good at explaining how this legal dance plays out. Terry Canfield is very active on Mastodon and somewhat active on Twitter. And they're all Joyce White Vance, Barb McQuaid, Terry Canfield are all really, really good explainers. And the thing is, what Marcy's saying is, let's stop talking about what Jack Smith might do, and let's talk about how this is going to go down in court. Because the buzz in D.C. is that since Donald Trump's lawyers had to go talk to the DOJ trying to convince him not to indict him, he's getting indicted, and he's getting indicted soon. And the question is going to be for what? Probably the Mar-a-Lago stuff. What does it mean that there's a jury in Florida and a jury in D.C.?
Yes, this is.
It can mean a whole lot of things. For example, it could mean that the grand jury in Florida is interviewing the Mar-a-Lago employees. It could be that the indictment for stealing the documents is in Florida, but the espionage part is in D.C.
Could be.
It could be that Florida will handle the Mar-a-Lago stuff and D.C. will handle the January 6th stuff. We don't really know. There's a whole bunch of stuff that could be going on. All we know is that it's really complicated, and that's one of the reasons why it's taken this long.
Yes, the Florida grand jury is a new development, and they had not.
Mark Meadows testifying is a new development. Jack Smith meeting with Trump's lawyers is a new development, and stuff's coming to a head. Yeah.
Well, it is, and I guess for Marcy's point, it's a good reminder that the fact that we don't hear anything from DOJ, people are very fond of saying Merrick Garland's not doing anything; he's a complete failure. And every once in a while, there's this new development that people say, how did the DOJ manage to do this without us finding out until now? Like convening a grand jury in Florida, for instance. And the answer is, I don't know, but it should remind you from time to time that you don't really know what the hell's going on at DOJ or Merrick Garland because they don't tell you.
That's because secret agreements are secret.
Yes. Well, in the DOJ they are, but they're able to trust one another and actually come to agreements.
Washington leaks like a sieve, except for the DOJ when they want.
Yeah, when they want. That's true. And remember, I guess you should keep that in mind, is every day Trump is complaining on Truth Social about how leaky the DOJ is.
Right.
It's really
so,
not.
Two things about that. One is Stephen Beschloss on Substack.
Okay.
Is accountability finally coming? It may be time to expect evidence of Trump taking and keeping classified documents will actually lead to criminal indictment.
Well, all right.
Okay. Teflon Don, on my boss John Gotti. Are you angered like me that as evidence of his crimes keep piling up, prosecutors continue to hesitate from filing charges? Are you worried, like I have been, that nothing Donald Trump has done or might still do will ever convince Merrick Garland that it's time to indict? Well, a growing collection of legal experts are insisting the taped recording by Trump admitting he kept a classified document about a potential attack on Iran and knew he could not share it is finally, really, seriously, genuinely smoking gun evidence, because finally, really, seriously, genuinely, Special Counsel Jack Smith and his federal grand jury may have the evidence they need to indict Trump. Finally, such an indictment could be weeks or even days away. As you can tell, Beschloss is a skeptic, but even he's convinced, there might be a lot there.
Yes. Well, that's the
vibe
line
is
you have to
indictments
take.
Are coming soon.
They certainly should. I mean, yeah, they're right about that. The evidence is piling up. It's crazy, but it's also one of those things occasionally you need to remind yourself, this is not a normal defendant that we're talking about, and there's some very weird and ticklish issues surrounding it. And I think Marcy actually in that same thread at some point says, well, keep in mind, they may indict him, but don't expect that they're going to come collect him in shackles or anything like that.
Right. No frog marching.
Yeah. All right.
No orange jumpsuit stuff.
No, orange
we already
face.
saw that in New York when he was indicted.
Yeah, right. So you know that
but
that's
he does
the
come
case.
there, looks pale, and doesn't like answering questions under oath.
Yeah, and it was only a couple weeks later that we found out there's like 10 more grand juries than we thought. And, oh, hey, by the way, there's tape of him saying, espionage, I love that because I'm a spy. Oh, well, thank you. That's great. It was unexpected. But I'll tell you what is expected. You, tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
maybe we'll talk about
this.
other stuff. Maybe we'll talk about who's getting into the Republican race and what does it all mean.
Oh, okay. Or possibly not. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think a good segment with Greg today. I know it was very process heavy, but it's extraordinarily important going forward. Not only because it demonstrates the weird dynamics going on in the Republican conference, but even within the Freedom Caucus. I mentioned to you that there was this, maybe now's the time to read the piece from Kos about MAGA world coming for Marjorie Traitor Greene. That's not the name he gives her. That's my own. It's still my exclusive domain, although you're free to start using it if you want to. And, what's news here? Kos starts out this way saying, you and I know that Representative Marjorie Traitor Greene of Georgia is about as bad as Republicans can get. There might be dumber. Representatives Paul Gosar and Lauren Boebert are strong contenders, but few can garner the kind of coverage MTG gets with her outlandish and patently absurd takes. But in this MAGA-infused modern Republican Party, she isn't pure enough for the true believers. And since I guess this is going to be a vicious cycle for them. True believers. Who's a true believer? Well, you truly believe these things, but the things you believe aren't true. So are you a true believer? No one's ever going to be able to straighten this out. Greene has generally been a reliable conservative vote, but in recent months, for some unknown reason, she has also become a key ally of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, giving him cover for his caucus's extreme right flank. In fact, his conference's extreme right flank is the term they like to use. But maybe this is good. Like when they love to annoy people by saying the Democrat Party. Well, we can call them a caucus instead of a conference, and maybe that'll make them annoyed. I don't know. Anyway, indeed, like other Freedom Caucus nihilists, and here the caucus is the correct term, Greene supported McCarthy on all 15 speaker election ballots, unlike the Freedom Caucus nihilists. I hope I got that right. Anyway, she has also backed McCarthy's decision to withhold the January 6th videos selectively released to Tucker Carlson. I don't think we mentioned that, but I did see that story the other day that she sort of flipped her position on the surveillance video. At first it was, we'll release it all because it'll show how innocent everyone was. And then all of a sudden, for reasons unknown, she's decided, well, you know what, release it all except for some of it. Okay, sure. Well, you know, it might threaten the security of the Capitol. Well, yeah, that's what Democrats were saying before. Yeah, but I'm saying it differently because I hate socialism. So there you go. Anyway, she also backed McCarthy's decision to withhold January 6 videos selectively released to Tucker Carlson, who apparently got very little traction out of them before being fired, by the way. And last week, all hell broke loose when she voted for the debt ceiling compromise bill crafted by McCarthy and President Joe Biden. She's doing, of course, the thing here that people vying for leadership roles do. And yes, that means occasionally voting for stinkers of a bill that you just need to pass because that's what it takes to maintain control of the chamber for your party, which the Freedom Caucus folks refused to do yesterday with the rule vote. By the way, breaking news here. I was wondering if it was breaking news because it's the top recommended diary at the moment alongside this piece that I'm reading from Coast, but I wasn't sure how old the news was. But Greg tells me that it is indeed breaking news. So news is broken. Someone has to fix it, and it's going to be someone other than Chris Licht because CNN has announced Licht's departure / firing / resignation, I don't know what, on the air. So that's exciting news. He doesn't last the week, given how we started off on Monday. 30 minutes ago, read on the air, and just getting around to that ourselves now. Do I have any desperate messages about it on Twitter or anything else? Not sure. Let's see. What does this tell us? Oh, yeah, well, Mighty OCD knew because he was tweeting at 9:10, how many Scaramucci's in a Licht? So that's a good question. So word was out there, and we just missed it because we were busy explaining procedure. And, that's our thing. So I don't think we could be faulted for that. Now, back to the purity wars in MAGA world. How exciting that this is eventually happening. And by the way, can I just pause for a second? I mean, if you've been listening to the show since forever or whatever, paying attention, reading Daily Kos, just kind of wrapped up in progressive world for long enough, you'll recognize this as something that happens to every party of whatever stripe eventually, but more so when there are weird issues of personalities, like whether it's a cult of personality like Donald Trump, or not quite a cult of personality, but certainly something that there's some personal dynamism involved in the leadership style. Well, you'll see what I'm getting to in a second. But if you've been reading and paying attention for long enough, you will have seen this happen in the Democratic Party as well, where some challenge to the status quo arises, the need for change is addressed, and the forces of change coalesce behind one or another leader or group of leaders, and they bring about change, and they seize the role of leadership and start to impose the will of the people who have followed them in this reorganization / revolution, whatever you might want to call it. And then the hard realities of having to govern or run an organization, whether it be the DNC or anything else, set in and hard choices are made, and then some people think that the hard choices don't reflect the purity as they see it, and you're a sellout, and they end up trying to rid themselves of you and replace you with a new order. In other words, you would have seen this happen in the Democratic Party behind Howard Dean, and we're going to remake the party in a 50-state strategy, all of which were actually terrific ideas, etc., but definitely upset the status quo. Were definitely backed by progressive forces. Dean backers graduated to leadership positions in local Democratic Party, state level, and eventually at the DNC itself. And then they dealt with the reality of running a large, rather cumbersome organization and trying to set policy. And then eventually, not that long afterwards, a new force arises and says, we're still doing things by the status quo, or we've just changed the status quo for a different status quo and we need to change again. And the Bernie Sanders movement and the people involved there are busying themselves throwing out the Howard Dean people, or people who came up with Howard Dean and overthrew the previous status quo, and they didn't overthrow it fast enough or aren't pure enough for the new up-and-coming movement, and they throw them out, and et cetera, et cetera. You see this happen all the time, and you're seeing it happen here. The status quo in the Republican Party, overthrown by the Tea Party revolution, which itself ends up overthrown by the MAGA revolution, which itself is seeing itself overthrown because they sold out to elect Kevin McCarthy or pass a budget or try to do the dirty work of trying to run the place. And the nihilists always, with no anchors around their neck, are free to attack the nearest target of convenience, and that's almost always the status quo, and you see it over and over again. So now you're seeing it here, and it's fun to see it with them doing it, because we don't like them very much, and it's great to see them if the problem with these guys is that they're running around with knives taped to both hands. I guess the best outcome you could get is that at least they're stabbing each other in the back instead of stabbing us. All right, so back to Coase's coverage of things here. So as a result of the her flip-flop on the security video and her flip to become establishment Republican and support McCarthy and support the debt ceiling deal, MAGA is out for blood. The Daily Beast talked to a bunch of conservatives, all of them eager to see her defeated. In the past week, here's the quote from the Daily Beast. In the past week, former Trump administration official turned podcaster Steve Bannon, he's got no real job, so he gets to say whatever he wants, just like me, led the charge, calling for Greene to be primaried by a more right-wing candidate who was a real MAGA, quote, real MAGA. How do you like that? A fringe of far-right allies soon followed. I 100% support a challenge to MTG and look forward to meeting and helping a serious challenge to her, Stu Peters, I don't know who the hell that is, said to the Daily Beast. I think we've mentioned his name once before, and I think I said the same thing then. I don't know who the hell that is. One figure of the far right, activist and former Florida congressional candidate Laura Loomer, told the Daily Beast she's already exploring a primary against Greene. Now, she's from Florida, but why not move to Georgia? It doesn't make any difference. They're all carpetbaggers at this point. As of now, Loomer doesn't live in Georgia, let alone Greene's district, but that hasn't stopped her from wish casting. Now back to Coase here. Loomer, who lives in Florida, also lost a 2020 campaign against Democratic Representative Lois Frankel, 59-39, in what was a solidly Democratic district, despite then President Donald Trump's enthusiastic backing. It would certainly be a far cry from the urban district Loomer last ran in, which was centered around West Palm Beach, 100% urban, according to the Census Bureau, to Greene's 14th congressional district in Georgia, which is 40% rural. I mean, this is already too much analysis for this craziness. But, that's Coase for you. He likes to look at those things. And really, the Census Bureau is overselling the district's urban 60%, since the largest town in the district is Rome, population 37,713, with a metro area of just 96,317. It's a whole different world from West Palm Beach. Not that Loomer or her friends give a damn about actually representing constituents. Still, Loomer has an old grudge against Greene. She took a job from me when she publicly accused me of being crazy. She was right about that. And told Trump not to hire me, Loomer said to the Daily Beast. I think it's only fair that I get a shot at taking her job, too. Yeah, I guess so. You know what Donald Trump always says? An eye for an eye. He never says that as far as I know, but okay. I mean, maybe he does. I don't listen to him anymore. She is so trapped inside the MAGA cult that she cites Trump talk as if it's scripture instead of the original, scripture. Who said eye for an eye? That seems familiar to me. The problem with the nihilists is that, like Trump, they are incapable of forging real relationships. Oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. As such, Greene has had a fallout with almost the entire Freedom Caucus cast. There's her fight with Boebert, also reported by the Daily Beast and reported here. According to another source familiar, while in the bathroom, Greene asked Boebert, "You were okay taking millions of dollars from McCarthy, but you refused to vote for him for Speaker, Lauren?" She has a point there. The first source said Greene was in a stall and upon coming out confronted Boebert about taking money from McCarthy for her re-election and then turning against McCarthy when it came time to vote. And that's great Republican politics. The Colorado Republican was allegedly unaware that Greene was also in the bathroom at the time. Where did she think she was? That's when Lauren said, "Don't be ugly." The first source said, before she, in the words of this source, ran out like a little schoolgirl. But that just may be, she has short legs. It looks like she's running all the time, like small dogs. Anyway, of course, they did have video of her trying to run to get that vote. Anyway, South Carolina Republican Nancy Mace called Greene a religious bigot, to which Greene lost her head. And now some quotes here. Where is this from? The Independent reporting this one. The row, because it's the Independent, began after Representative Lauren Boebert of Colorado made Islamophobic remarks about Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. She does that pretty frequently. One of two Muslim women elected to Congress, calling her a member of the Jihad Squad. In response, Ms. Mace criticized Ms. Boebert on CNN on Monday. How old is this? Is this current? She's still doing this? I mean, wouldn't surprise me. Anyway, so I'll skip the rest of that quote. You get the idea. Greene is certainly not taking Bannon's slings and arrows sitting down. Steve and I aren't getting back together, she wrote in a text message to Representative Matt Gaetz that was obtained by the Daily Beast. And if he keeps it up, I'll take the house and kids. I hope you send it to Steve, because I'm done. Is there anything more delicious, asks Coast, than watching the worst people in the world tear each other apart? Ironically, these people generally agree with each other ideologically, but as politically immature true believers, they are incapable of handling even the most minor disagreements, creating chaos and disorder in all their interactions. The end result is a Republican Party that keeps drifting even further from the American electoral mainstream, unable to talk about the issues that people actually care about. Okay, there you have it. So, like I said, the whole front page over at Daily Kos is quite interesting and worthy of attention today. Well, not the whole thing. I mean, it's all worthy of attention, but we can't give attention to all of it. Let's see. I'll scan around. I mean, there's the Chris Licht stuff, which I think I'll just let you read as it's breaking news. Still needs to be developed. Perhaps we'll talk about it a little bit tomorrow, but he's out, and that's the important thing. Okay, so let's see. Other things from Pocket that I had to share with you. There's a real wide variety. Again, as I mentioned here, let's see. So we have the grand jury in Florida, which there's just not that much information about what they're doing. So maybe our time is better spent on other things. We can circle back around if any more information develops. But the best theory that I had seen so far was that perhaps the grand jury was convened simply for the purpose of dealing with possible participation in crimes by Mar-a-Lago staff, who are strictly Mar-a-Lago staff, not carried over from the Trump administration in Washington. So all of their activities were in Florida, and you can't establish any real nexus to jurisdiction for them anywhere else. So you convene a grand jury and say, well, some of the things that you did were against the law, whether we want to prosecute you for them or just leverage that threat against you. It all has to start with a grand jury in Florida, as opposed to, are there more crimes that happened? I mean, most of the, what else are you going to add on top of espionage, really, at this point for Donald Trump? Okay. But in other courtroom related drama, I wanted to at least note for the record that this has happened, though I'm not certain of the import of it. It may end up just being another stupid failed motion, but the New York Times reported the other day, what was that day? June 5th, that Trump has asked the judge to stop E. Jean Carroll's second defamation suit. He asks judges to stop all suits against him. Let's see if there's anything to it. Former President Donald Trump told the judge that he could not have defamed E. Jean Carroll by denying her rape accusation because a jury had found him liable only for sexually abusing her. That's a twist. Don't know how well that's going to go. Benjamin Weiser is the writer of the article here. Former President Trump told the judge Monday night that he could not have defamed Carroll by denying her decades-old rape accusation because a jury found him liable only for sexually abusing her. She said rape. I denied the rape. The jury didn't say I raped her. The jury said I sexually abused her. And I guess that's true. They did say that, right? His lawyer said in a newly filed court paper that Trump's denial that he raped Carroll in the mid-1990s in a Manhattan department store dressing room was truthful. I don't know about that, but that's what he's saying. Based on the jury's verdict last month after a 2-week civil trial, they argued, Carroll's defamation claim must fail. The operative question in this case is, and has always been, whether a rape occurred in the Bergdorf Goodman dressing room, wrote Mr. Trump's lawyers, Alina Habba and Michael Madeo, referring to the department store. Okay, yes. The jury found that one did not, they added. And I don't know. Let me think about this. Anyway, a civil jury last month found Trump 76 liable for sexually abusing Carroll, less serious misconduct than rape, and for defaming her when he called her case a complete con job and a hoax and a lie last October. The jury awarded Ms. Carroll $5 million in damages, and soon after the verdict, Trump made similar disparaging comments in the CNN program, just a little CNN program, a town hall dedicated to allowing him to do this, of course, and on social media. Ms. Carroll, 79, asked the judge to punish him further in a parallel case that is still open before him. Trump's new court filing in that case, which Carroll had filed in 2019, and in it she accused Trump of defaming her after she publicly disclosed the attack for the first time. At the time, Trump called her accusation totally false and said that he could not have raped her because she was not his type. That 2019 defamation lawsuit has been tied up in appeals and is still pending. Remember, we explained that a couple of weeks ago. Carroll's lead lawyer, Roberta Kaplan, said in a statement Monday evening that nothing about the verdict in the recent trial was inconsistent with Carroll's longstanding claim. The jury unanimously found that Donald Trump forcibly, he sexually abused her. Trigger warning for all, I guess. It's the lawyer describing in stark terms what actually happened, at least what the jury in the previous case was willing to find him liable for. Although, I guess I'll also point out here that, you know what? We don't even need to get into it. It's fine to have given the trigger warning, but I think we can work around this. And it's not that I'm afraid to read the thing to you, but it's just not necessary, and it's a little more graphic than I wanted to get into, and, people could get upset about it. But reminder that, one, he was accused of assaulting her and accused of raping her, and the verdict in the first trial was that they did not find him liable for a rape, but for a sexual assault. And perhaps they weren't sure whether they had seen enough proof. I don't know what the reasoning was. But remember also that the verdict is never innocent. the verdict is not guilty. That is to say, we don't find enough evidence in place to have guilt in a criminal trial, but in a civil trial, liability to attach. And granted, it's a lower threshold of proof necessary for finding liability, but it's also, similarly, it's not a declaration that this didn't happen. It's only a declaration that we don't find either enough proof or we don't find the proof convincing enough to say we will attach liability to it. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. So it probably won't carry a great deal of weight to say that jury said it didn't happen. No, that jury said it couldn't prove that it happened, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. And that's kind of important. Well, at any rate, getting back to what the article contains, Kaplan added, the jury believed Carol when she testified that Trump sexually abused her. As a result, the jury concluded that Trump knowingly lied about Ms. Carroll when he claimed otherwise. It's really honestly, in a defamation case, it's no defense to say, well, she said I raped her. And she also said I sexually abused her. Now, some people believe that I did both. Others believe I only did one. So how could I have been guilty of defaming her by denying the second one when I already got caught doing the first one? But yeah, it really wasn't, the defamation wasn't about whether or not there was a rape or a simple assault. The defamation was about what you said about neither of the things being true and the reasons why they couldn't be true. Anyway, the recent trial arose from, of course, a lawsuit that Carol filed against Trump last November under a new state law in New York, a reminder that exists, that grants adult sexual abuse victims a 1-year window to sue people they say abused them for battery, even if the statute of limitations had long expired. The jury on May 9th awarded Ms. Carroll damages of $2 million for the sexual abuse, $3 million for the defamation. Trump's appealing the verdict. And then he went on CNN and said the whole thing was fake and a rigged deal and et cetera, et cetera. And so now they're back in court. Carroll's lawyers then filed papers in court asking a judge to allow them to revise the separate and earlier defamation suit that Carroll filed against Mr. Trump, sometimes referred to in court papers as Carroll 1. The case that was actually brought to trial was, I guess, therefore Carroll 2, just to help you keep things straight. So, all right, that's happening. It's out there. Other things are happening as well, and some of them are pretty crazy. So, by the way, the underlying bill that Republicans were fighting about when they defeated the rule last night is maybe gets a little bit more description here in the pocket version of the Rolling Stone original written by Nikki McCann Ramirez that Matt Rigdon shared with me yesterday. And I think I'd like to read this just to see if there's any more detail about the bills so we get some understanding of what they were trying to do. On Tuesday, a cohort of House Republicans blocked a rules package that would allow debate on 4 pieces of legislation, including 2 bills that would prohibit regulation on gas-powered stoves. That's what's going on here. By the way, the headline, House Republicans sabotage their own gas stove bills to punish Kevin McCarthy. Matt Rigdon, when he sent this to me, was asking, does it, count for anything? Any points on your way, I guess, to legislative heaven, as he put it? I can't recall exactly how he put it, but to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. Well, they're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons is a huge part of legislative work all the time. So I don't know whether they ever evaluate you on that. But here's the deal. The move is surprising not only because the procedural rule votes rarely fail to pass muster, but because for months Republicans have been screeching about the need to defend gas stoves from the tyranny of consumer safety standards. You remember all of that, right? 12 Republicans sided with Democrats to strike down the package. Representative Matt Gaetz confirmed to reporters shortly after the vote that the defection by GOP lawmakers, including Chip Roy, Lauren Boebert, and Andy Biggs, was revenge against Republican leadership for their handling of last month's debt ceiling negotiations. We're frustrated at the way this place is operating, Gates said. We're concerned that the fundamental commitments that allowed Kevin McCarthy to assume the speakership have been violated as a consequence of the debt limit deal, he added. Gates says, or I guess Asen tweets that Gates says, we took down the rule because we're frustrated with the way the place is operating. You know what? This is just by way of proving where that quote came from, so we don't actually need to reread that. Gates himself tweeted in January that he would not give up his gas stove unless it was pried from his cold, dead hands, which is exactly how it might go down, I guess, if you just keep breathing in all those fumes. He's apparently placed his indignation on the back burner in order to get back at McCarthy. And that's what underlies the whole thing here, right? What really underlies it is these were the bills they were bringing forth. But rather than actually accomplish the thing that they wanted to accomplish, they're sabotaging it to hurt McCarthy. Except maybe they're not sabotaging it because the thing they wanted to accomplish doesn't accomplish anything because the thing they think they're fighting about isn't happening. So maybe they, in the end, decided it's not such a bad thing to sacrifice this because it wasn't going to do anything anyway. So they tell on themselves that way. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on At Roots Radio. One last chance. One more segment to try to keep you well informed about what's happening underlying all of these stories. So as we left off, Matt Gaetz had tweeted in January that you can only take my gas stove when it's pried from my cold dead hands. And of course, the issue is, one, no one was trying to take his gas stove, and two, now no one is trying to prevent anyone from taking your gas stove either. But we sure showed Kevin McCarthy or something like that. So how much pain this whole thing will actually cause House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is debatable. While kitchen range politics have become all the rage among lawmakers looking to score some cheap culture war points, there is no current proposal for federal regulations on home cooktops. However, some individual states and cities have implemented local legislation. Representative Ken Buck, who showed up in the earlier segment, Greg mentioned him, he told reporters who asked if he and his colleagues' action signaled a larger stalemate for Republicans' legislative agenda in the House, that McCarthy needed to, quote, abide by the agreements he made when elected Speaker in order to restore order. Except, remember, again, I just have to remind you that, as I said to Joan yesterday, you're talking about people interpreting supposed secret agreements that they have with Kevin McCarthy and whether or not they've been violated. But these are people who believe that if you say, I disagree with your idea, you are violating their First Amendment rights. It's weird. It's a bad child's understanding of relationships and deals and agreements in general. Anyway, back to the story. The hysteria over gas stoves was kicked off in January after the CPSC agency commissioner, Richard Trumka Jr., said in an interview that evidence suggests, and it does, that gas-powered appliances may contribute to poor indoor air quality and childhood asthma. Products that can't be made safe can be banned, Trumka said, but he didn't say he was going to ban them. The commission later clarified that they had no plans to ban the cooking appliances, but Republicans quickly turned to their cooktops into a culture war flashpoint, posting memes and angry tweets about the sanctity of gas-powered stoves. Last month, during a House Oversight Committee hearing titled Consumer Choice on the Back Burner, examining the Biden administration's regulatory assault on Americans' gas stoves, Democrats roasted Republicans on how truly idiotic the topic of debate was. And a quote here, "I want to apologize on behalf of the Democratic Party that we have decided to prioritize kids' safety in their neighborhoods from getting gunned down in movie theaters or grocery stores or school churches or synagogues," Representative Jared Moskowitz of Florida said in a sarcastic statement to the committee. "We as Democrats have clearly lost our way, that we are not focused on appliances." After Representative Debbie Lesko, Republican of Arizona, proposed the Save Our Gas Stoves Act to block the radical, out-of-touch regulatory proposals around gas stoves, which haven't been made, Moskowitz introduced several amendments to the act, mocking the entire bill. In one, he called for the creation of the position of Supreme Allied Gas Commander in the Department of Energy to police the use and sale of gas stoves. The congressman also proposed a statue honoring gas stoves be placed in Statuary Hall. Lesko was undeterred and defended her bill Tuesday morning before Gates and company sabotaged the vote, describing safety standards as radical and out of touch. So, I don't know. I just thought the whole thing was really kind of interesting and entertaining that they were sure that they had a culture war winner here, and then the culture warriors themselves killed the ability to use it for messaging, although they don't really care. There were no regulations proposed to ban gas stoves, but that didn't stop them from railing against those supposed regulations. I suppose, in that sense, the failure of the legislation won't stop them from railing about this, that, or any other thing that they'll still yell about. You have to pry my gas stove from my cold dead hands. Though I suppose some people might ask them, why didn't you do anything to stop it? And he will say, I did, but I also didn't. And then I don't know. It's just sort of, just sort of a weird thing. Also not discussed. We haven't spoken about it much, but it's mentioned in some of the articles that there's another issue of conflict, and I forget already the name of the guy who wanted to do it, although it's in some of these articles. And I guess if I read the Hills article about it, we'll be reminded of it. But there was this other bill that a Republican wants to bring to the floor that also, likewise, should be a big messaging thing for them. And we didn't explain exactly what was going on with it. And it was, whose bill was it? It's definitely mentioned in here. The gun brace bill, pistol brace bill. So apparently the ATF had been looking to reclassify, pistols that attach, to which you can attach braces, like the shoulder brace. It sort of and that it turns them into what they would classify as a short-barreled rifle, which is kind of, what it is. But that demonstrates, the difficulty in regulating guns, and gun enthusiasts are constantly railing about that. This is a pistol, but it's got a long handle on the back. Yeah, well, that makes it a rifle, really. The point of the brace is that it allows it to be fired as like a rifle, and rifles are better than pistols in terms of their accuracy and much easier to fire quickly because of the brace on there. So, the ATF was doing something, or proposing doing something, that actually made a great deal of sense. But I don't know. I guess gun enthusiasts figured that this was somehow, well, any regulation to them is a violation of the Second Amendment, and so they were going to oppose it, and all the Republicans would doubtless be voting for this thing. But it's not coming to the floor because leadership isn't clearing the way for it, because the chief sponsor of it, and it's not that, the leadership of Scalise is opposed to the bill. What they're opposed to is giving, I guess, a big PR win to a member who has not been helpful or supportive and done the job of supporting leadership measures on procedural votes. And yes, you end up getting punished for those things occasionally. But also, I guess, another note for people who are long time listeners to the show and long-time readers of Daily Kos, another analog for you that this has happened on the Democratic side as well. These procedural votes, and it said, well, look, the job of the majority is to provide a majority for the rule so that they can bring their bills to the floor and control the agenda and control the floor activity. And in a fit of pique, if you give that up, you're giving up the whole point of being the majority, and it's just not done. Similar situation once, twice, 10 times on the Democratic side, when we've had to remind and lecture people, sometimes conservative Democrats, sometimes not, that similar loyalty is expected from you when Democrats are in the majority on motions to recommit. Also a procedural vote that the leadership, whatever party is in the majority, considers to be an obligation of the members of the majority to vote for the rule and against motions to recommit. And if you're a longtime listener or reader of Daily Kos, you know what a problem motions to recommit can be and have been for Democrats in the past. And this is a similar concept. It relinquishes control of the legislative process for easy, quick, cheap escapes, or fits of pique for that matter. And so they're cousins in that sense. So I was going to take a look at the Hill's reporting on this to see if it discussed the gun bill. I thought that it did, and it appears that it does not do so extensively. But there's definitely an element of the House Freedom Caucus which is angry that the leadership is saying, if you're not going to be there for leadership, leadership's not going to be there for you. But that's viewed two different ways. One, that way makes it seem eminently sensible, right? If you won't do the job that leadership needs of you, voting for rules and against motions to recommit, that when it comes time, what you're basically asking for is a favor from the majority leader who schedules bills for action on the floor. Normally there's a lot of bills competing for time on the floor. That may not be the case right now, but traditionally it has been the case. And so it's the case normally that the majority leader has to parcel that stuff out very carefully, and that they have frequently said, majority leaders of both parties over the years have said, listen, if I've got to prioritize, why isn't it sensible for me to prioritize bringing bills to the floor from people who have been supportive of leadership? You need a favor from us. We need a favor from you. You don't do the favor for us. We won't do the favor for you. That's actually regular human relationships, easy to understand, and applied to the legislative context, though, it's like, well, you're not letting the people have their voice. Well, that might not necessarily be the case. Remember also that I've told you over the years that very often 5-10 different members will have bills, sometimes the exact same bill, sometimes just generally similar. And it's a leadership choice. Which one will we bring to the floor? Usually we see things like Republican leadership has the choice of two identical bills, one written by a Republican, one written by a Democrat. They'll choose to bring the one written by the Republican to the floor and claim credit, even though the idea may have been stolen from the Democrat who wrote the bill first and has been trying to pass it for years. It's just one of those things. Or occasionally you'll find it even inside the party where somebody who doesn't have enough clout inside the party has a great idea, and for whatever reason, the party decides that it's better if a different name is attached to it, whether they wrote a similar bill or not, and they bring it under that other member's name. And although you get the chance to be co-sponsor and vote for it, the big moment in the spotlight ends up belonging to someone else. These things do happen, and they do happen in both parties. But there's a choice to be made, and the leadership is the one empowered to make it. So it could be that a gun brace bill will come to the floor. It just won't have this guy's name on it because he was a jerk when they needed a favor from him. And now he'll learn what it feels like to deny someone a favor and have them, not be very happy with you. The gun situation, the bill, the underlying substance will still be taken care of, but someone else will get the credit for it. And they should, if they did the work that the leadership asked from them. That was really the point that I wanted to make. This is a very easy way to understand this as straightforward and sensible. Here it is. It was Andrew Clyde, a Republican from Georgia, who was behind this bill to prevent a federal ban on pistol stabilizing braces. So there you go. And then Clyde last week accused leadership of threatening to block his bill from receiving a floor vote if he opposed the rule on the debt ceiling bill. Scalise said Tuesday morning that he informed Clyde it was Republican opposition, not his vote on last week's rule, that was preventing a vote, but GOP leadership was working hard to get the legislation passed. Now, he may have been fudging it a little bit there, Scalise, and saying, well, it's not that we're punishing you, it's that we're running into Republican opposition to your bill. That could be true. You never know what kind of nuanced opposition might arise. But it could also be that the Republican opposition is, hey, I took the hard vote and voted for that rule. I wanted to break ranks. I wanted to make my constituents happy in the culture wars, but I know how critical it is to avoid default. So I went along to help out. And why should that guy's gun bill get attention when he didn't do what I did? I got a bill just like it. Or, hell, I'll steal his bill and put my name on it. Why don't you reward me? I did the hard voting. That might be the Republican opposition they're facing. But Clyde, of course, sees it this way. Let me be unequivocally clear. I was threatened that if I voted against the closed rule to the debt ceiling agreement, it would be very difficult to bring my pistol stabilizing brace bill to the House floor for a vote. Yeah, it will be. Clyde had been expecting to get a vote on his bill next week. After meeting with Scalise following the failed rule vote, he said a vote is scheduled on the legislation next Tuesday. Well, we'll see. Clyde voted in favor of the rule on Tuesday, but other conservatives leaned on his clash with the leadership to justify their dramatic protest. So that's interesting, too. Maybe that freed him up to say, all right, I will do you the favor, but I also will see the rule fail as a result. So interesting. He thought it was a horrible thing to be threatened like that, but he did knuckle under to the threat and now hopes to see his bill on the floor next Tuesday. It's very interesting, and it's amazing that, I guess it shouldn't be amazing, that these people have no ability, as Coe said, to develop real relationships, and then that this sort of thing should shake out as a result. It's rather astonishing. Okay, other subjects for today, and there are a bunch. Let's see. One, I wanted to read Charles Pierce's quick commentary on the immigration stunts that are being pulled by Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, and others. They're still up to this old trick, and the one that famously moved migrants and dropped them eventually in, was it Martha's Vineyard, apparently has of late begun dropping them in California as well. And Gavin Newsom has been rather outspoken about that. But Charles Pierce was as well, and had, I thought, a particularly good and quick take on all of this. saying it is completely bizarre that Florida is allowed to do this. That's the headline. This scheme to, quote, transport migrants across state lines is crying out for the intervention of federal law enforcement on every level. And of course, we know that the local sheriffs in Texas, where the migrant flights to that ended up in Martha's Vineyard originated, has said, yeah, we may have a case for kidnapping against these guys. These are taking people under false pretenses and against their will and across state lines at that. And their legal status is in question, and there's any number of complications. Somebody really needs to answer for this, but yet it's still happening. And Charles Pierce thinks that's weird. Not to put too fine a point on it, but the state of Florida seems to be running some kind of a kidnapping operation. And here's a quote from the Los Angeles Times about the latest round of these things. The documents appear to show that the flight was arranged through the Florida Division of Emergency Management. I guess the one that, well, are we talking about the ones in, Martha's Vineyard? Yes. Okay. So, and it was part of the state's program to relocate migrants, mostly from Texas, to other states, Attorney General Rob Bonta said. The contractor for the program is Vertol Systems, which coordinated similar flights that took dozens of Venezuelan asylum seekers from San Antonio to Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts last year, he said. So now, yes, I'm sorry, it was a mistake, I scanned and I saw the Martha's Vineyard thing. We are now talking about the new round of flights that was dropping people in California. All right. In an interview with the Times on Sunday, Bonta didn't mince words in blaming DeSantis, who only last week became a candidate for president, for the latest incident. This is Governor DeSantis. This is his baby. This is his project. His fingerprints are all over it, Bonta said. The governor signed it. The legislature approved the fund to fund it in the budget, and they hired Vertol Systems Company, a vendor, to carry out the work. He added, it's DeSantis being exactly who he is and advertising to the world that he is petty, little, and full of political stunts that hurt, harm, and abuse and exploit people to try to get cheap political points. It's wrong. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' office did not return calls or emails, etc., etc. And it's unclear what role, if any, the GOP presidential candidate may have had in the flight. Okay, come on, sure. Now, Charles Pierce speaking again. These schemes are, as he said before, crying out for the intervention of federal law enforcement on every level. Everything is happening across state lines. This latest one is a bank shot from Texas off New Mexico to California. The FAA should act against the air transport, and the FBI can take care of everything else. I know the DOJ is busy these days with other Republican activity centered on another part of Florida, but this is now what looks like an arrogant, deliberate act of deception by Florida's government against helpless people, and an arrogant, deliberate act of bureaucratic aggression by Florida's government against the governments of its sister states. This is the kind of thing that in its original intent, the Constitution was first designed to prevent. Now another clip from the LA Times. Bonta said Sunday the migrants, most of them from Venezuela, told officials that they were promised jobs and that someone would assist them in finding work. Instead, the group was dropped off at the Catholic diocese. When someone at the diocese opened the door, two men said they would return, but instead drove off, leaving the group of migrants behind, Bonta said. They never intended to help them find a job, but told them that they would do so that they would get on the plane and sign their documents and be transported to Sacramento, Bonta said. They completely exploited, abused, and manipulated these folks who were vulnerable and were hoping and dreaming of a job, and told them they would be helped finding that job, only to be abandoned. And again, Pierce concludes, it is completely bizarre that this is allowed to continue. It is an infamous practice, dehumanizing at its essence and dangerously provocative as regards national unity. There are principles involved here far above the meager political pay grades of tin horns like Greg Abbott in Texas and Ron DeSantis in Florida. It is a cheap hustle, and it needs to be closed down. And that's all I have to say about that. And that is to say, I'll allow Charles Pierce to speak for me on that one. Well put and succinct. Just wanted to get that on the record because it was a fairly strong statement and I wanted you to see it. Let's see. There's more, and we only have a few minutes left to us, so maybe we'll clean up with a couple of short items. This one, I thought, relevant and also well put from Press Watch. That's Dan Frumkin's publication, Substack-like, I guess, but Press Watch noting during this Pride Month, we haven't spoken really much about the fact that it's Pride Month, journalists should be ashamed. Well, that's ironic because, of course, Pride Month is all about not being ashamed anymore, but that's only if what you're doing isn't wrong. And what the journalists are doing is actually wrong, I guess. I don't think we're going to come to any realization later that we were closed-minded about journalists actually being right here. So I think we'll be pretty safe in the lens of history. The front page headline in the Washington Post proclaimed that, quote, emboldened shoppers are threatening Target workers for carrying Pride Month merchandise, a trend that the article explained had, quote, engulfed the chain, quote, in culture wars. What he's saying here, why should they be ashamed? They should be ashamed because they're kind of whitewashing what's actually going on here. Emboldened shoppers are the ones. They are emboldened, and they may actually be shoppers, but they may also not be. But what a terminology. I mean, they're bigots and bullies threatening people. If you call and say, I'm going to bomb your store if you continue to sell Pride t-shirts, you're not an emboldened shopper. No more so than, suspects in Grand Theft Auto are emboldened valet parking attendants. These emboldened shoppers, Dan goes on to say, in reality, retrograde bullies and bigots spewing the kind of hatred that had been increasingly confined to the dark corners of society before the Trump era, couldn't have asked for better, more indulgent coverage. This is a problem. Needs fixing. Something terrible has changed in our society as the Republican Party has become a toxic stew of Christian nationalism, white supremacy, misogyny, homophobia, and especially transphobia. It's a sickness. It's a giant step backwards. But that's not how the Washington Post sees it. Reporters Jacqueline Pizer, maybe, and Jacob Bogage, B-O-G-A-G-E. Bogage? I don't know. Oh, sorry to distract from that. They wrote in their nut graph, though Pride Month and other inclusivity initiatives have been around for years, they've increasingly become litmus tests for consumers, forcing companies to fully commit on social issues or yield to critics. This kind of coverage is sadly typical. The furious reaction from phobic haters is repeatedly seen in the mainstream media as a marketing challenge rather than as an alarming sign of societal regression. It's bad enough that our elite newsrooms normalize book panning, teacher gagging, history erasing, and other clear signs of incipient fascism. It's bad enough they falsely equate hostages and hostage takers. What's even worse is the calm and measured coverage of the ongoing assault on the personhood of a significant portion of the American population. After decades of progress, there is now an all-out war on queerness. Where, any normal person must ask, is the outrage? There was a similar journalistic failure a year ago after the Supreme Court declared war on women. The short answer is that elite newsroom leaders feel that outrage about anything is unseemly because it would appear to be taking sides. Sustained outrage is even more unacceptable. To the people who consider unflappability the ultimate journalistic achievement, sustained outrage is a symptom of hysteria. Case in point, some Times contributors earlier this year, and I guess we're talking about New York Times, yes, signed a letter calling out negative bias in the Times' reporting about transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people. In particular, raising serious concerns about derogatory coverage of gender-affirming care. The response from management was to breezily dismiss those concerns as coming from activists. Many of the most senior, established, and comfortable reporters in the Times newsroom responded even more unctuously, saying the original letter writers suffered from, quote, a fundamental misunderstanding of our responsibilities as journalists. Oh. Well, this continues, and we might as well get a little bit more of it in before we sign off here. As the Republican culture war has turned into a full-fledged battle against basic human rights, the political media's continued insistence on covering it like just another political tactic is enabling it. That's right, journalistic restraint is aiding and abetting the dehumanizing of gay and trans people by a bunch of evil fanatics. Guardian media columnist Margaret Sullivan wrote recently that transgender individuals are continually portrayed, including too often in the media, as some sort of dreaded societal problem about which something must be done. And she wrote, the mainstream news media far too often plays along, running wide-eyed stories that fail to identify what's really happening here. Kelly McBride, the lead ethicist at the Poynter Institute, likens this period to the civil rights movement of the past, urging journalists to avoid a both sides approach. There are moments where people are asserting their equality at the same moment that the state is asserting their inequality. And that looks very different, she told independent journalist Nora Noose. And we are late once again in getting our outro music playing here, but maybe we'll sneak in another paragraph or two before we sign off for the day. Favorably covering Pride Month hasn't been remotely controversial for ages. This year, with gay and trans rights under attack, reality-based journalists should be leaning into it, using it to remind our audiences of the moral imperative to recognize, defend, and celebrate the humanity of all people. And instead, the Associated Press concluded that Bud Light, quote, fumbled its attempt to broaden its consumer base by partnering with a transgender influencer because, for some, the partnership went too far at a time when transgender issues, including gender-affirming healthcare and participation in sports, are a divisive topic in state legislatures, and you know how they feel about divisive topics. Bud Light has included LGBTQ plus people in ads since the mid-1990s, including a 2016 trans-inclusive national TV ad, and supported Pride events for far longer than that. The New York Times dutifully noted that conservatives had expressed outrage at the Christian right Chick-fil-A chain, of all places, simply for adopting a policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The backlash, reporter Jesus Jimenez wrote, has made Chick-fil-A one of the latest companies to draw public condemnation over culture war flashpoints. Did you know they had done that?
From
we haven't talked about it.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Anyway, great points as usual from Dan Frupkin. Time for us now to turn it over for the great points to be made by Justice Putnam on his West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here next on Netroots Radio. What's up? Mark Meadows could only be only the second White House Chief of Staff to be convicted of crimes. Oh boy, we can't wait. Stay tuned.